All right, in this chapter, we're going to be talking about genetics and human inheritance. So we're going to start off by learning about genotype versus phenotype. Genotype is what we call the genes of an individual. So genes are just segments of DNA that code for a specific trait. Now, each one of those genes is going to be located at a very specific location or locus on a particular chromosome. When we have variations of that gene, we refer to them as alleles. So an allele is simply an alternative form of a gene. So for example, the trait or the gene could be eye color, but there would be one allele for blue eyes, one allele for brown eyes. So the gene is eye color, but the alleles are the different variations that are possible for that particular gene. Alleles are going to be are classified as either dominant or recessive alleles. Now, a dominant allele is going to mask the expression of a recessive allele. So even if the recessive allele is present, you're only going to see the effects of the dominant allele. So when we're continuing on with genotype, a dominant allele is going to always be assigned an uppercase letter, and then a recessive allele will have the exact same lowercase letter. So, for example, if we're talking about albinism, the allele for a normal pigmentation would be capital A, and the allele for no pigmentation, or the allele for the albinism, would be lowercase a. We're always going to use the same letter, uppercase and lowercase, but we're going to use the same letter to denote dominant versus recessive alleles to help keep things straight. So for each pair of chromosomes, you're going to receive one chromosome from each parent. So you're going to receive one chromosome from your mom and one chromosome from your dad. Now those chromosomes that you receive from your mom and dad could be the same. So you could have the exact same allele from each parent, or you could have different alleles from each parent. When you inherit when both of the alleles inherited from your parents are exactly the same, we say that the individual is homozygous. Homo meaning same as, zygous referring to the types of alleles that are present. So if you're getting the exact same allele from both your mom and your dad, we say that you are homozygous. If you are getting different alleles from your parents, we say that the individual is heterozygous. Hetero meaning different. If the individual is receiving both alleles, if the alleles received from both parents are dominant, we say that the individual is going to be homozygous dominant, meaning that both alleles received are going to be the dominant alleles. So in the case of albinism, you would receive one normal pigmentation from your mom, one normal pigmentation allele from your dad. In the case that the individual is homozygous recessive, both alleles would be the recessive trait. In other words, you would receive one albino recessive gene from your mom and one albino recessive gene from your dad. If the individual is heterozygous, like I said, you receive two different types of alleles from your parents, one allele being dominant and the other recessive. We say that the individual is heterozygous. So you would receive the normal allele, or the allele for normal pigmentation from mom, and the allele for albino pigmentation from your dad. So that's going to be your genotype. Genotype just refers to the types of genes that are present. Phenotype, on the other hand, phenotype refers to the physical appearance of the trait. This is ultimately going to be determined by the genotype, but the phenotype is what we're going to physically see. So in the case of albinism, we're going to see that a homozygous dominant genotype. So we have two alleles that are both for normal pigmentation. We're going to see normal pigmentation. So homozygous dominant will give us normal pigmentation. Homozygous recessive, on the other hand, two alleles for the recessive trait. This is going to give us an albino pigmentation, or a complete lack of pigmentation. In the case that the individual is heterozygous, this is also going to give us a normal phenotype, or normal pigmentation phenotype. So in this case, our genotype is homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, and heterozygous. Our phenotype would be normal, albino, and normal pigmentation. So genotype is going to determine the phenotype. Phenotype is the physical appearance of the trait. Genotype is the genes that are present there. So please make sure that you read carefully through this section. You should be able to define the following terms: gene, allele, locus, chromosome, dominant, and recessive. I also want you to know the difference between genotype and phenotype. This is very important. You will be asked for genotype and phenotype frequently. We're going to be doing several exercises in our lab. We're going to be doing several homework assignments and quizzes. You will be asked for either genotype or phenotype, and you will be expected to know the difference and give the appropriate one. All right. And then summarize 3 possible genotypes and their corresponding phenotypes. Yes, go ahead and do this. You will get lots of practice with identifying genotypes and phenotypes. So make sure that you do know the difference between homozygous dominant, heterozygous, homozygous recessive, and then what phenotype we would see. In the case of a homozygous dominant individual, you would see the dominant phenotype. In the case of a heterozygous individual, you would see the dominant phenotype. In the case of a homozygous recessive individual, you would see the recessive phenotype. All right, so that's it for this section. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns.